bare bones introduction to Lightroom. It kind of walks you through the process of getting photos into Lightroom, doing some developing of raw files, and then getting photos back out. And with that said, let's get right into it. So I'm sitting in my Lightroom library. It's a little bit on the messy side. You can ignore that. But I'm going to come down here to Import and click the Import button. Now, I have already slid an SD card into the little card reader of my computer. But I'm actually cheating a little bit in an effort to keep this shorter and not wait for pictures to import. I have stuck photos on my hard drive as well that I'm going to import into Lightroom. So when you have a card reader or the camera attached and you go to the import dialog box, you should have this EOS digital or whatever camera you're importing from as a device, and then under that is your file bit. So I'm going to come down here, and as I said, I dump some pictures onto the hard drive. So I'm going to click right there, and very quickly it's done that because it's just pulling them right off the hard drive. Now across the top I have several different options. Copying them in as a DNG, it's Adobe's kind of open source digital negative files. I could copy them, I could just move them from their current location, or I could add them without moving them. What you're going to do most of the time, or what I do most of the time, is copy photos to a new location. That's going to copy the files off of the card, and I can make sure that they have all come over correctly and are happy and safe on the computer before I put that card back in the camera and reformat it, because that is what I do each time I clean a card off. It gets reformatted in the camera that it's going to be used. That just kind of keeps it cruft free and minimizes the issues you might have with SD cards or whatever media you are using. Where are they copying to? We're going to get to that in just a second, but please note that Lightroom does not actually hold any of your pictures. It's just managing them for you. It holds previews, but the actual files live outside of Lightroom and in a kind of folder structure that's up to you to set up, and we'll get into that in just a second. So I'm going to leave that on copy just as if they were coming over from an SD card or whatever. Render previews. I have it set to standard usually, and basically what that does is a decent file size preview for you to go through and be able to check focus and general kind of updates along that line. And so that's good. Your other options under there though is 1-to-1, which sets up a very large preview file for every file. It takes a little bit longer for them to all import and build those previews, but then your rendering here, and as you go through your library, is going to be quite fast. Embedded in Sidecar is basically Lightroom doesn't do any work. It just takes the embedded JPEG that's in each raw file and shows you those. In minimal, I honestly don't know what minimal is. I think it's just going to do as little as possible. Standard is good. It works for me. I don't want any imports duplicated. I have an option to make a second copy if I'm bringing in supercritical wedding or client work. When I import, I do have those go to two locations, a backup drive and the work drive at the same time. It's kind of nice. You can rename the files as they come in, and I often do that with date and then the file name. This way, everything is going to have a unique file name. You know, you only get 9,999 pictures before the file names start over. And you may think, well, that's a lot of pictures. My partner and I last year shot over 60,000 photos. And so you can see that that's multiple rollovers, and very easily you can have multiple file names. It's really only a problem if you're dumping them all into the same folder, but it's just nice to be able to rename as they come in, and that's an option there. Apply during import. This is something that I'm just going to touch on here, and that is you can have presets, kind of like a recipe that is applied to the picture as it comes in. You may or may not know that raw files can look fairly dull straight out of the camera, and they need a little bit of work, and you don't have to work on every single one all the time. You can set up a preset that applies a little bit of something to them. I'm actually going to turn this off, but notice that there's all these other presets that are here right now, and so I'm going to say no import. Metadata, you can write information into the image file. This is invisible information when they import, and I have my standard copyright information that comes along with it. You can also apply keywords at the time of import. I can't tell you how important it is to keyword your images. It's just critical for finding them later and organization, and you put them online. Flickr, 500 Pix, all of those places support the keywording that comes out of Lightroom, so it's really nice. That said, I'm not really going to apply anything to these because they're variants, they're from different events and things of that sort, so there's no one keyword that would work for all of these images. So I'm just going to leave that as is. The destination, this is where do I want these files to go? I have my hard drive, and then I have this external drive that I'm working on. And as I said, it's fairly messy, but inside this external drive, I have a 2013 folder. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to say into a subfolder. And this is where I put the current date, and then I'm going to put some kind of descriptive text here. In this case, Lightroom Toot 1. And that's listed there, and now you can see that it's put this down here to 1913 Lightroom Toot, and that will work. So now down in the bottom right corner, I have just going to double check that I'm bringing these in. I'm copying them. I am not applying any develop settings. I am putting in some copyright metadata, and I'm going to hit import. Now, they're going to start importing fairly quickly because, as I said, they're coming off the hard drive, and you can see that they're coming in. Why they come in? While they come in, I'm going to talk a little bit about how long this can take. If they're coming off an SD card, this is where you really see the difference in speeds of SD cards and the speed of your reader as well. This can be quite a slow process if you have a slower card. Or a slower reader, or a slower computer, because it's going to bring them in, and then it's going to also develop those previews for us as well. Let's talk a little bit about where it's coming in right now, though. We are in the library view, and I currently have this set up to show me it's under view, grid view style. And I have show extras and show badges on, and then under view options you can choose exactly what is shown on these boxes. And right now I have set capture date and time, and if there's a caption there, I have that shown as well. So a lot of options, really customizable, make it work the way you want and will work for you. Down here in the bottom right corner, I have this little thumbnail size adjuster, so you can get more or less on the page at a time. Over here in the bottom left corner, we have the grid view, which we're in right now. We have the one image at a time view, which they call their loop. We have their compare view. We'll bring up two images side by side. And we have multiple select. You can bring up multiple in that, and you can just hold down Command to select multiple images. Click that button, and then there are all those images in there. We're still in this library mode where we now have these panels over here where we can add keywords to these images. We have some keywords that I've used recently that are available to being used, and then I actually have the keyword set is also set to recent, so that's duplicates, and you could just hit that little triangle to close that. Further down we have our metadata. Let me pick just one of these pictures, and it will give you information, the file size, where this picture lives, what's the file type, dimensions, exposure information. This is all really good, what lens was used, and what aperture, and that's part of the exposure information. This is all really good information to review in your kind of quest for figuring out why a picture looks the way it does. lots more space for information that you can fill in here, or different programs can write into, like GPS, latitude and longitude, location, and things of that sort. We also have this handy histogram up here. I will have a video coming soon that talks lots more about the histogram in your computer and here. They are the same thing. They're showing you the same information, and it's good information to know. This is also some general exposure information up here, the ISO, film speed, and aperture and focal length and things of that sort. You also have this quick develop module. I don't use that quick develop module often, very, very infrequently, but it is there for you to use. What I do now, all the pictures are downloaded. Usually takes longer. I walk away, get a cup of tea, or relax for a little while, come back once they're all downloaded and the computer is happy and calmed down. And I start on the first one, and I start in loop view, and I just start going through these files, picking the ones that are keepers. Different people have different methods in this. As I said, there are lots of different ways to work with Lightroom. Some people like to reject. That's the X key. And keyboard shortcuts in this program can be a lifesaver, so we'll talk more about those soon. But you can just Google Lightroom keyboard shortcuts, and there's lots of options out there. I used to, my previous method was to go through and reject pictures by hitting X and then getting rid of all those rejected. Rejected were ones that are really out of focus, really poor exposure, something's really wrong with them. I am not going to use them, and they're not savable or worth saving. I delete far less these days. Space is pretty cheap, and especially working with clients' images, there may be some reason that somebody says, did you get a shot of Uncle Bob? And I maybe didn't get one that I thought was very good, but then going back through, it's good enough that it makes them happy. So I'm very rarely delete these days. What I do instead is just give them a 1-star rating if there's something that I want to work with. And I just use the right-hand arrow on the keyboard, tap right, and say, okay, I like that. I tap the 1 key to give it a 1 star. And you can see down here, it now has a little 1 star, and at the bottom of the thumbnail, there's a little 1 star in there. 1 through 5 is the star ratings. I just start with 1. Very rarely do I do anything higher than that unless I can tell that it really is a great shot right away. So I'm just going to go through fairly quickly and say, sure. Sure. Now let's bring both of those in. All right. Let's say that I've gone all the way through now. Maybe I'll pick this one too. And now what you can do is right here, you can filter and say only show me the 1 stars and higher. And that's exactly what it's doing. So out of those 52 photos, I picked just 7. Now, what I do is I move to the Develop module. And this is where the real work and the real power of Lightroom starts to be apparent. Again, I am just going to touch on just a few things here, and we'll come back with future videos that go in more depth soon. You have over on the right now, instead of the keywords and the metadatas, you have all of these development panels. The basics, the tone curve, hue, saturation, color, black and white, split toning, detail, lens correction, effects, camera calibration. Those are all there. We're just going to touch on what's in the basic. And that's, very rarely do I do much in these others. I certainly use them, but basic is where you're going to spend most of your time. Let's work our way down from the top through the basic panel. The treatment. You can switch everything. This is not a great example of switching back and forth between black and white. Let's switch over to that one. You can switch to a black and white shot or color. Just leave that as color. Next, you have your white balance. You can choose as shot. That's the camera's auto setting if you had it on auto or whatever it was set on. You can choose the Lightroom's auto. Very rarely is that significantly different. Usually it's very similar. Slight changes. You can say, well, this was actually shot in kind of a cloudy day. And that is pretty true to life once I switch it to cloudy. You play with those. You can also play with the slider here, the temperature slider. White balance is measured in degrees Kelvin. And that's what those numbers over on the right-hand side mean. I do hope you're watching this in full 1080p so you can see. If you're watching this in something less, I think it might be hard to see some of these numbers over there on the side. but you can adjust this. You can also, let's come over to this one. This is a pretty good example. This is fairly whitish. The white balance isn't terrible on this picture, but I can grab this little dropper and say that this is white right here. And I click that, and it just tweaked. Let me do a quick undo. So the white balance came in set at 5050, and when I click this and click over here, it switches it to 5350, increase of 300 degrees Kelvin, and it messed with the tint a little bit too, or I should say it adjusted the tint a little bit. And that looks pretty good. Let's move down a little bit to exposure. Right here we can hit auto, and Lightroom will look at this picture and do what it thinks is best. In this case, it exposes a little too much. It's not always the smartest, same as your camera. Your camera is not always that smart about exposure. I'm going to bring this down just a little bit. This is the same as the exposure meter in your camera. So your camera can overexpose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stops. This can expose above 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or down below your middle exposure. Either way, and you can see it. And this is also really where you see the power of working with a raw file. You do not have nearly as much latitude in changing most of these settings if you're working with a JPEG. Lightroom will still do it. It'll happily bring them in and work with them, but it just doesn't give you as much latitude. So I think somewhere right around there is good. Contrast. You can add a little bit of contrast. That pop preset you saw I had, really all it does is add a tiny bit of contrast and a small amount of clarity. We'll get down to that in a minute. But notice I haven't made huge changes here. Highlights. This is basically just what it says. It looks at the brighter pixels in this image and allows you to change those. So this is great for saving kind of blown out bits or bringing up a little bit of brightening highlights if they're just a little dingy feeling. In this case, I don't think I need to do a whole much. Shadows, very similar. You can, the darker images you can get darker, or you can bring up to bring some detail out of them. Whites and blacks, very similar. All of these settings right here, the highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, can be adjusted pretty significantly without any negative impact to your image. But beyond that, you really shouldn't be changing many of these sliders to too great a degree unless you want that really kind of over-processed looking image, which for some images works. For most of my images doesn't work really well. Clarity is kind of, you can almost think of it as a sharpness. It really looks for those contrasty lines and makes them more significant. And so just adds just a little bit of what I call pop to the picture. Vibrance adds just a little bit of color, but it does it in a smart way that it doesn't mess with skin tones and can be used without too much negative effect to your image. Saturation really kind of is like spraying a hose all over your image and really brings up all the colors, and very quickly stuff can look very unnatural. You of course can go the other direction as well, and you bring saturation all the way down and all of the color from your image is gone. So I think this one is pretty good. You know what, let's move to this next one real quick. I'm just going to make some changes here. This white balance definitely needs to be a good bit cooler, and I'm just going to, I think exposure maybe come up a little bit, but that ring is really bright, so I'm going to bring the highlights down just a tiny bit and add just a little bit of clarity. If I wanted to spend more time here, I certainly could. This image does need more work, but that's good enough to start with. And I'll show you one other shortcut. I brought over two of these images that were very similar, and I liked the changes I made to this one, so I can say copy and say copy and come over here and I can paste. And now it takes all of the changes I made to the first images and an image and applies them to the second. Now you can see that doesn't make them look identical because both of these images started from different exposures and look, but it did change, it did give me a starting point. The other thing you can do is hit previous, and that will take whatever image was right before this that you changed and apply those settings to this one as well. So in this one, this image can come up a whole lot more. Let's say, what do we want? Let's see what it looks like black and white. That's kind of interesting. I'll bring up the contrast a little bit more, but very quick. So when I'm happy, And a lot of times, maybe when I go through and start to edit my pictures, I say, well, I don't actually want that one. I'm going to tap 0, takes it out. Because this filter of stars is on right now, those get removed out of there. And so I'm left with just these 4 pictures. Now, when I go back to library, I'm back in library. I still have my filter on, so it's only showing me these pictures. I can turn it off by clicking again. There are all of the pictures, or I can click it again. And now, since these are the 4 pictures out of all of those that I want, this is when I tag them. I spend time, giving them appropriate keywords. And once they have those appropriate keywords, I then file, export them out. And I have presets for exporting. Ones that go to Facebook and the blog, which are kind of smaller size. They're 1920 maximum resolution. They don't need to be any larger than that. And I have one for my personal site for sharing, and then my Smug Vault, which is the big originals. Raw files get backed up there. Only the very best do, because it's expensive. But basically your export list looks like this. Where do you want to export them to? And most of the work is down here. JPEG, if you're going to be sharing them online, JPEG 90, resize, what size do you want? Again, if you're just throwing them up on Facebook or Flickr, things of that sort, really 2000 width and height is the maximum that you need. A little bit of sharpening for the screen, not a whole lot. Facebook does a bunch more sharpening, so if that's your final destination, you could. You don't want to apply too much sharpening. You hit the export button, they dump wherever you want, and then you upload them up. There are other options as well. There are, you can get in here to these kind of publishing services. I haven't set those up. I actually don't use those, but they are handy. They are there. I'll show some tutorials about those soon. I think that's all I want to cover in this. It's pretty basic, getting your pictures in, picking the ones you want to work with, working with them in that basic panel, and then moving them on out. You remember, when you're exporting copies. The originals still live here. The other important thing to say about Lightroom is all of these changes we made are what's called non-destructive changes. I can come back into the Develop module at any time and basically reset all of this. Go back here to the import settings, and I click that, and the image is exactly back. Everything is zeroed as it was when I imported it, or I can go back to that setting. So that is a really nifty feature, and that's why you keep them in Lightroom, so that you can go back and make those editing changes at any time. As I said, if you have any questions about Lightroom, if there are topics you are dying to see covered, leave a comment down below or find me over on Facebook page and leave me a message. I hope this was helpful, and I appreciate you watching. Thanks.